Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure and privilege to welcome you all here to the international echoes of FameLab 2014. We are all very lucky that a collection of young scientists from around the world have come to Prague to entertain us with their short presentations, of which they won their respective countries' national FameLab competitions and then represented their countries in the international FameLab competition in Cheltenham in England. My name is Michael Lonsborough and I'll be hosting today's event along with the charming Katja Sefton.
So today we have the opportunity to witness a truly international FameLab extravaganza. Just out of curiosity, who here knows what FameLab is? Show of hands.
So
well, we have a few people.
There's a young lady here, and then the rest of the FameLab competitors themselves. So allow me to explain to you what FameLab actually is. FameLab is a competition for young scientists, and they all have 3 minutes only to talk about the subject of their choosing. It can be their own work, or it can be the work of others, something that is scientific. And they are not allowed any presentations or projections of any sort. They can only take with them what they can carry onto stage, so they can carry some props with them. And after their presentation, normally in the FameLab competition, there'll be a panel of judges, and they would ask them some questions and adjudicate on their performance.
Today it's going to be a little bit different. You'll still hear the 3-minute presentations, but there won't be any judging. Today it's all about science and fun. And so instead of the judges, we have you guys. So if you want to ask any question that might interest you about the talk or about any scientific topic that they could possibly be able to answer, you have the chance today.
Yeah, it's definitely, today is not about a competition as such. There's going to be no adjudications. It's all about an interaction between our young scientists and you. And there's going to be a lot of opportunity for you to ask questions that you're inspired to ask, or to contribute to a communication, to a conversation with the young scientist and your own ideas. So that's the plan for today. Anyway, I think
before we start, we should thank the people who have made today possible.
Yes.
Namely the British Council, Cheltenham Festivals, Neuron Foundation, the Academy of Sciences of the Czech Republic, NGO Adeto, and the Tomáš Baťa Foundation, and last but not least, the Czech Centres.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's extremely important to recognize the generous contributions of all these people that make such events possible. We've enabled us to get some amazing people to travel here to Prague. I think that's something I certainly very much appreciate, to get this international flavor here in Prague, which is great. And without further ado, I think we should begin. And our first speaker, well, he's come all the way from... You got to be careful. Stop it. You've got to be careful. You've got to be careful. You could start a tornado.
What?
You could start a tornado. Maybe in Japan or something.
What are you on about?
Where's my telephone? Have you got a telephone?
Got it.
Where's my telephone? I need a telephone here.
What are you doing?
You got to be careful. You got to stop it. Hey, no, konnichiwa. So, Michael, so, hey. No, so, thanks. No, Sendai tornado has started and it's your fault.
How is it my fault?
You started the tornado.
No, I didn't.
Well,
I've never been to Japan.
I'll tell you what, we have an expert about how flapping for flies can start a tornado in Japan. And here to talk about it from Italy, all the way from Italy, please welcome Marco Ferrigo.
Thank you. Hello. Well, as you might have heard, the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil can set off a tornado in Texas. But what I'm going to explain is what is the mathematics behind this catchy phrase. And to find out, I will describe to you an experiment that involves the typical mathematical tool. Soap bubbles. The first part of the experiment is extremely simple. You just blow your bubbles and watch carefully at the outcome. You should count how many bubbles form, which direction they take, and how long they live. The second part of the experiment is a challenge. Try to reproduce exactly the same outcome, the same bubble behavior. What can you do in order to achieve that? What you can do is try to reproduce exactly the same initial conditions. So you will try to stand in exactly the same spot, put your stick at the same height, and blow with the same intensity. But what happens is that even when you try yourself many times, you will find that any shot you give is completely different from the others. What happens is that the first shot and the second one are able to follow a similar path for a couple of seconds at most. But then some small, tiny differences in the initial conditions have time to evolve and embiggen and result in the end in totally different outcomes. And this experiment has many similarities with how the weather prediction work is done. Because what a meteorologist does is to collect data about air pressure, air humidity, wind intensity, and then puts them in computers where sophisticated mathematical models elaborate those data and create that accelerated multimedial version of reality that you see when you watch weather forecast programs in TV or on the internet. But again, what happens is that reality and its simulation can follow a similar path just for a certain amount of time, and then some small, tiny differences in the initial conditions have time to evolve and embiggen and result in totally different outcomes. And this is how the small flap of a butterfly's wings, if not properly measured, can end up in an unpredicted tornado. The edge of predictable with modern technologies and mathematical models is about 48 hours. But how far can this edge be pushed? Well, this is a really difficult prediction to make. Thank you.
I told you, Katja, it's your fault, your fault.
It's always
Totally
my fault.
your fault.
It's always my fault.
Thank you very much, Marco, for the lovely explanation how little decisions in your life could have amazing end results. Does anybody have a question or a point?
Please, even if on the first one. Don't take your questions for the last one.
Any intellectual output at all that you would like to come up with? There's, well, Marco, I mean, I think that's a fascinating, almost philosophical point.
Mm-hmm.
This concept that I can attempt to do a reproducible event, and yet all the time it's going to be slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
So is it possible that even in my own life, sort of very mundane decisions could have incredibly profound effects on my future?
Yes, it will be extremely interesting to try to model life and people decisions and how we behave, to find a small model that reproduces how humans interact and take decisions, and then try to put a decision in that model and see how it behaves and how it is different in real life, exactly what it happens with weather predictions. The point is that in weather predictions we have some physical laws and we have some data. It is way more difficult with humans, but it's extremely interesting to make predictions in that way. This is a reliable way to make predictions, and this is all what science is all about. Find a reliable way to make predictions, not just be based on my knee hurting to say tomorrow will rain. I don't know if you in Czech Republic have sayings like this. In Italy we do, sorry.
Yeah, that's the general procedure in the Czech Republic. Everybody sort of looks at their knee. And
they do not even make weather predictions. No. They just feel their knees. Okay, anyway. Oh, that is not a knee, by the way. Sorry.
Any questions? Any questions there?
I have questions for the past mic too.
Does anybody feel they've in their lifetime they've made a little decision and then it turned out to have an amazing effect?
Oh, this is nice. He did.
that they can share with us? There's a gentleman there in the blue, Dasha.
Well, but it is of course been, I met Anna. That was what you're
Yes.
going to say, right?
Well, it's hard to say. I'm sure everyone makes them every day, right? And how would we even know? That's all.
Okay. David has
Question
a
in
question.
the front.
So,
David,
oh,
Mike.
all right, cool. I don't have to be loud. So you said this modeling conditions can be used to predict weather specifically. What kinds of facets of weather can we predict with it? The heat, whether it's going to rain, earthquakes? Like, what exactly can we predict with mathematical models like the one you
Yes,
described?
that's very interesting. It depends on what you specifically decide to focus on. It's really interesting that you mention both heat and weather and raining, which are related to weather, but for example, earthquakes. The point is that the interactions that you can find, for example, in the forming of clouds, in the creation of clouds, may be reused at the first attempt at least to reproduce the interactions between, I don't know, I'm not an earthquake expert, but there are for sure some interactions between clouds, which slip one over the other, and this is the same that happens with the Earth superficies, you know. There are parts that slip one over the other. So the point is that mathematical models can be reused and adapted in various situations. So you can use them to try and predict earthquakes, but that's quite a delicate subject in these days. You could try and use them to predict whether it is going to rain and how much and with what intensity and so on tomorrow, which is a less delicate subject. So you can reuse that definitely. Thank you.
So you say that if you don't properly measure or quantify the flap of a butterfly's wings, it could cause a tornado in Texas or
Okay,
wherever.
let's say that.
Japan.
Or Japan, or who knows.
Wherever.
But the point is that is obviously an extremely, I would imagine, unlikely event, because the actual magnitude of the effect of a butterfly's wings on the environment is really small, and there are much more influential effects, in other words, bigger things moving around and whatnot. So my question is, what kind of detail do you really need? Because obviously you're never going to be able to measure all the butterfly's wings flapping or anything else, but there is maybe a threshold beyond which you can actually get detailed predictions beyond 48 hours or whatever. What level of detail do you think you need?
Well, this is a really interesting question. The point is not at all a statistical approach. What I focus about is the analytical mathematical models, which means we do not take into account statistics or probability at all. We try to make perfect models. Of course, this will not work. And the point is that there is not a limit. There is no way you will make 100. Okay, I don't have to say 100%. You will make right predictions for any time. The point is that the better initial conditions you measure, the longer in time your model is affordable. That is the point. So it is really related. The accuracy of our measurement is really related to the length in time we can make predictions on. So my final sentence, which is the edge of predictable is now 48 hours, but it can really be pushed as far as we can, as far as we can imagine. And this is all about improving technologies, improving mathematical models. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but I said something interesting, I hope.
Okay, we have another question over here.
Can you recommend some website which is the most reliable for weather prediction?
For weather forecast?
In Europe?
I never watch weather forecast programs.
You just use your knees, don't you?
This might be interesting. So, no, I'm sorry. But I think they're all pretty much, they use pretty much the same technologies, the same mathematical models. Once a mathematical model is available to everyone. It's not there are a leader company, to my knowledge, in weather forecasting. So, anyone.
What is it essentially based on? On air pressure and wind direction? I mean, when they're making...
What are exactly the data
weather,
you have to take into
for the
account?
weather, what's the most important influences? Because if I can remember back to my grandmother's house, When we used to, before, in front of her door, this is in England, she used to have this beautiful barometer, which just measured pressure. And then there was an arrow, and it would say, fair, set fair, rain. So you get these 3 or 4 possibilities, and it was just based on the pressure, and it was pretty reliable.
Well, in England, I believe it.
Yeah,
because it's always on rain.
Right. Well, I don't know. No.
Not true. Not true.
Sorry.
Tropical
of course,
island.
that is the prejudice I hear all the time. In England, it always rains. Not true. It's a tropical island. A tropical island.
Sunny weather.
Lots of sun.
Very warm.
But for me, I don't know, as somebody who's trying to understand the weather as a little child, then it became clear to me that the most important aspect is pressure. And as a chemist, I can understand that, because if I pump a lot of pressure, I'm forcing the molecules to go together, and you can have a
that is
more
how
of a
water forms.
Right. And as soon as that pressure releases, you're going to get condensation. And so, I mean, is that how these mathematical molecules generally work?
I've never thought of this, because from a mathematical point of view, you usually give these things for granted because they're up to other kind of scientists. You know, once you have the data that you know are important because another scientist told you so, you focus on the interactions. This is the physical part, and mathematicians get into giving the best model from that data with that interactions to get to your result. So it's a teamwork, and I would not know how to answer your questions, but I find it really interesting.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? Okay, thank you very much, Marco.
Thanks to you all.
What are you doing? Michael?
I am a robot. I am a...
You're not a robot.
I am a chemical robot.
No, you're not.
I am a chemical robot. I am a chemical robot.
To tell you about real chemical robots, please welcome Jitka Čejková.
Hello, do you know any English word that comes from Czech language? Nobody? Robot, exactly. This word was first introduced in 1921 in Karel Čapek's famous play R.U.R., Rozum's Universal Robots. This word derives from the Czech word robota, which means forced labor. And what is the play about? A mad scientist, Rozum, discovers how to create artificial life and starts creating artificial human beings. What follows is a factory for making robots, a robot rebellion, and the extinction of human race. I really recommend you to read it or watch it. Although it's almost 100 years old play, it opens many contemporary questions. I work in chemical robotics laboratory. Our chemical robots share some properties with Čapek's. They also have no wheels, no electromechanical devices, no computer system to control them, and they are also made of colloid. And our chemical robots share some properties with living cells. So our goals are not as big as Rozum's. We don't want to create artificial human beings. We are much more modest. We focus on creating of small artificial cells. Living cells are able to respond to local changes of pH or temperature, as do our chemical robots. Living cells are able to absorb molecules, process them by chemical reactions, as can our chemical robots. And just recently, we taught our chemical robots another thing, to move chemotactically. And what does it mean? Living cells are able to follow gradients of some attractive compound or run away from the source of harmful substance. Our chemical robots, in the form of oil droplets, are able to follow additions of salts. We have experimental setup with mazes, and our oil droplets are able to find the source of the salt. At the moment, our chemical robots are training to become transporters of chemicals, a sort of chemotaxi. We hope that in the future they could serve as transporters, for example, for targeted drug delivery. So we will see if our project will be successful, and the term, we have the nickname for chemical robots, cobots, and if the term cobot will enter the English language as Čapek robot. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay, I have one. You talked about chemotaxis. What are they capable of transporting? Like drugs?
Yeah.
What's the size limit? And
it depends on the application. So if we will decide that the chemical robots will be for drug delivery, they will deliver drug, and also the size has to be small enough to enter the living body. Or we can use them for some smart cleaning. They will be able to find the harmful substance and neutralize this compound. And in this case, they can be bigger. It depends on the application, their size.
How about you and chemi robots? I mean, are you looking forward to the day that your doctor will give you some chemi robots and they're going to go inside you and start doing all sorts of nice things to help improve your state of affairs? I mean, I'm looking forward to when I'm going to go and visit you and you can give me some chemi robots to clean my arteries of all the cholesterol from all the klobasi which I eat, or that can go to my hair follicles and start to generate some hair, or I don't know, whatever it might be. Does anybody here have anything to say about the possibilities of chemi robots? Is it something you'll be more, apprehensive of, or is it something you're looking forward to? Maybe a show of hands. Who's looking forward to a future of chemi robots? Okay, so about half of you. And the other half, you're quite apprehensive. You'd rather not sort of embrace that technology. That's interesting.
Maybe it's because some laboratories are working on similar things, and they also focus on self-replication of artificial cells, and people are afraid that they will divide without any control. So the definition of our chemical robots is that they are not able to self-replicate or evolve. So if the amount of chemical robots into you will be constant, no chemical robots division in your body.
Yes, a question here.
Hold on, microphone.
I think this is the future of medicine, first of all, and I'm very glad that more and more people are working on this. And I'd like to ask you what kind of materials you're using, like polymers or some organic chemistry. What is it based?
I am working in chemical robotics laboratory, and our boss is Professor František Štěpánek, and the group is pretty big, and we are around 30 people, and we have some subgroups, and we are working in many ways. So the main part of our prototypes are based on alginate particles, which are biocompatible. But also we prepare some polymer particles with biodegradable polymers.
And have you tried your?
Not yet. There is not yet any application
cells
into
or some small animals.
Yeah, we tried targeted adhesion of our particles to some cancer cells. So our chemical robots can absorb only to one type of cancer cells and not to others. So it's the idea for targeted delivery, so they will move and they will adhere only to targeted cells. So we have some paper about this.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I suppose in one sense, things like T cells and white blood cells, which are involved in our immune response, I mean, these are arguably also chemi robots, in that they respond to something, they go to that place. And
they are our models.
Right, so, so can you take these cells and then just do some sort of modifications to them?
But it's not our way. You can do it, but we would like to prepare some synthetic objects.
From the bottom up?
From bottom up.
Isn't there a chance that if you introduce this foreign substance into into an organism, that those white blood cells will attack it?
Yeah, it's possible that they will attack them. So in that case, we have to use some special molecules, and in that case, our chemical robots will be like invisible for T cells.
Any questions from the audience? Yes, over there.
Yeah, hi, hello. So my question is there any way how to control those chemical robots, for example, with remote control?
So the question is if we can control them and their movement. So it's the aim of my work, and I focus on chemotaxis. So normally you can control something with some electric power or magnetic field, and we use only chemical principles for the movement of our oil droplets. If you are interested in, you can find in YouTube our movie with Amaze, and we have oil droplets, and they follow salt additions in 2D maze, and it has now almost 300,000 of views in YouTube, and it's pretty famous, so look for it.
Any questions? Anyone else? No? Well, thank you, Itka.
Hey, Katja,
Yeah.
you know, what are you wearing on your head? I mean, it looks ridiculous.
Green Revolution, baby. Oh, yeah.
Green Revolution?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, what revolution?
Look, I've been reading up on it, I've done my research, and it's coming. You just can't stop it.
Are you feeling okay? I don't know what you're talking about.
It's because you don't watch enough FameLab videos, honestly, Michael. Well, I have my friend over from Ireland, well, Germany now. Please welcome the international winner of FameLab 2014, Porrick Flood.
Imagine you were inside a leaf. It's a sunny day, and the cells around you are glowing with a soft green light. You move into one of these cells, and you see that this green glow is coming from melon-shaped objects called chloroplasts. As you look closer, you see tiny antennae harvesting this light and channeling it down to a reaction center. It is at this point that light becomes life. This process is known as photosynthesis, literally building with light. It is the fundament of all life on Earth. The energy I am using to talk to you right now, the air we are breathing, and even the fossil fuels that power our economy all come from photosynthesis. I'm telling you this because our population looks set to reach 9 to 10 billion by 2050. This is a massive increase in the number of people that need to be fed, and it is way beyond our current capacity to produce food. But believe it or not, we have faced such a challenge before. In the 1950s, the world's population reached 2.5 billion, and for many experts, further sustainable growth seemed an impossibility. They predicted massive famines and the collapse of our civilization, and referred to it as the population bomb. But thankfully, some scientists did not give up. They had a vision, and collectively they brought about an agricultural transformation like nothing we have ever seen before. They quadrupled yields in a matter of years in what became known as the Green Revolution. The man who spearheaded this was Nobel Prize winner Norman Borlaug, who is credited with saving more lives than any other individual in the history of our species. His work was so incredibly successful that in the developed world we went from potential food shortage to food mountains. But this is no longer the case. The population time bomb has not stopped ticking, and that is where photosynthesis comes in. The scientists of the Green Revolution did an amazing job at increasing crop productivity, but they never managed to improve photosynthesis. In fact, some scientists still say that it can't be done. But already, from my own research, I say otherwise. There is a resource out there, a resource which is a fuel of evolution and which we can tap into. This resource is genetic variation. In the case of photosynthesis, this variation manifests as differences in the efficiency at which plants convert light to life. The genetic basis of these differences can be used to create plants which will feed and fuel our future. We must increase the productivity of our crops so that we can buy the world time to reach a point of population stability. In the words of Norman Borlaug, you can't build a peaceful world on empty stomachs and human misery. We need a second green revolution. And photosynthesis is one key which cannot be left unturned. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very emotive speech there about photosynthesis and the transformation of light into life.
Any questions?
Any questions?
Regarding photosynthesis, green revolution, overpopulation of the planet?
Light to life, life to
Big
light.
questions, come on.
Genetics, anything?
No.
Why is it so difficult to reproduce photosynthesis in the laboratory? Why the scientist hasn't succeeded yet?
It's difficult because it's complex, quite simply. Photosynthesis is the most complex energy transducing process in biology. And photosynthesis, the type of photosynthesis that plants do is called oxygenic photosynthesis, and it splits water. Water is a very stable compound, so splitting it requires playing with fire, literally. You play with to be able to pull water molecules apart, you need something really powerful. And obviously, if you're using something really powerful, you have to control it well, otherwise it can cause serious damage. And that's very difficult to reproduce in the lab. Plants have a lot of difficulty with this too, so they are constantly trying to control their own machinery so that it doesn't blow up and kill them. And if you put plants in conditions where they can no longer control this, they die. So it's very difficult to split water using just light in the conditions that we have on our planet, and difficult to do it in a safe way for the organism. People have used things like photosynthesis in terms of they're able to generate electricity from light, but it's much more difficult to split water and to build things using light alone, which is what plants do, which is what's so impressive, but very difficult to replicate.
Any questions? Yes.
I was thinking of underwater plants. Have you ever thought of how underwater plants do photosynthesis, and could this help you in your research?
Well, so people have actually studied this extensively. So plants underwater, in terms of light, depending on how deep they are, but the ones near the surface anyway, it's not so different from what plants on land experience. But what plants underwater suffer with is that it's very difficult to get CO2. So carbon dioxide, which is this thing you hear about in reference to global warming, is much easier to get when you're in the air as a plant than when you're in the water. So plants in water develop all of these, what they're called carbon concentrating mechanisms, which are basically turbo boosters, which concentrate carbon dioxide around the active site of the enzyme, basically creating an artificial atmosphere inside the plant, which is enriched with carbon, so that they can run at a higher rate, even though carbon is very difficult to get in the water. That's the main challenge those plants suffer from. And there are people who are trying to take those turbo boosters and put them into living plants. And they're actively trying to do this, but obviously it's not a very easy thing to do. And there has been some limited success with it recently, but it's still got a long way to go. So it is something people are actually looking at. But yeah, it's work in progress.
Yes.
Thank you for a moving talk. I have also a question about like upgrading the plant with the genes. I heard that some gene, I don't remember the name, from the fish was placed into the tomato to make it stay fresh longer.
Okay.
Have you heard any different like examples, or do you have any comment on
like
upgrading
other examples of GMOs, or to explain how that works, or
depends on how you take it.
What I want to do, okay. Well, I won't explain how it works exactly because I don't know. I've only heard of that example, and that's just to do with increasing shelf life of tomato fruits. But the concept of GMOs is, does everybody know what a GMO is?
Raise of hands, who knows?
Who knows what a GMO is?
GMO is?
So some people don't know what a GMO is. A GMO stands for genetically modified organism. And it's kind of it's a semantic argument. It's an argument which, like, you can say everything's genetically modified, but what most people mean when they say genetically modified organism is an organism which has been taken to the lab, and a gene from another organism has been cut out of that organism and stuck into this one, which is basically copy and paste, like what you do in a Word document. And then you try to get it working in that organism so that it gives you, for example, a protein. And that protein might be a protein which increases shelf life of a tomato, or it might be a protein which maybe would increase photosynthesis, or develop new pigments, or most importantly, actually, give resistance to disease. So that's one of the most useful things about GMO, is that you can take a resistance gene, so a gene which allows plants to identify a particular pathogen or disease, and put it in, let's say you take it from a wild species of potato, and you put it into cultivated potato, and then the potato becomes resistant to blight, which would be brilliant, because then you need to use much less chemicals. And that's one of the main uses of GMO, and that's how it works. It's kind of copying and pasting. I don't know if that's...
So how does that compare to genetic variation? What are the advantages and disadvantages of both methods?
Well, genetic variation is not so much genetic variation itself is not a method, it's a thing, it's what's there. I mean, there's genetic variation in this room. We are different heights, we have different eye colors, hair shapes, everything like that. That's all based, a lot of it is based on genetic variation. There's also the interaction with the environment. So the fact that you speak Czech and I speak English has nothing to do with our genes, but to do with our environment. And there's an interaction between the two. But that genetic variation that is there also occurs in all other species. So for example, in plants, it occurs in terms of their photosynthetic capacity. And you can use that variation to learn about photosynthesis, but also to use it as a source of improvement. So you can take the plants with the highest photosynthesis and breed them to create plants with higher and higher. And that's basically what farmers have been doing for thousands of years, except today we can do it in a more sophisticated way. And it is, in a sense, a form of GMO. It just doesn't necessarily involve the lab in the typical sense of white coats and things like that.
But the example of the tomato, I think the gene that was described is, I think, if I'm not wrong, is an anti-frost gene from a fish. Because I don't know, I mean, a lot of the Czechs here, I mean, I live just, just outside of Prague, and often there's, in springtime, you get these wonderfully warm days, but the mornings there can be a frost. And in my garden, I actually grow tomatoes, and they usually grow well, but every now and then, you must know it if you grow tomatoes in your gardens at home, sometimes in late spring, there comes a frost, and the tomatoes are just gone. And that's because in Europe, we don't allow GMO, and so we don't have tomatoes that have this anti-frost gene from the fish. Whereas in America, when you buy the seeds, they'll probably have that gene in there, and you wouldn't have that problem. And maybe a question for the floor would be, would you be for or against this application of technology? So that, for example, you could grow in the Czech Republic tomatoes and not worry if the frost comes, that will be destroyed.
Who would be for that? Let's have a show of hands.
Pro-GMO.
And who would be against?
And
so most of you don't have an opinion. I guess there's two. That's interesting. And may I, why are you against it?
It's just feeling that probably it mightn't be right. We don't know the future in the longer term, not just 5 years, but maybe much longer. So.
Okay, if maybe I can. There are much riskier things in life than GMOs. Getting in a car is, you don't know what's going to happen 5 minutes from now if somebody's going to drive into you. GMOs have been studied quite extensively, like really extensively, and the only studies which have shown them to be dangerous have turned out to be fraudulent. And there are literally hundreds of studies. You see, the thing is that GMO is something that happens naturally anyway. You are not completely human in the sense of what you think you are human. You have genes from other organisms in you which came in previous generations. Viruses are constantly putting pieces of DNA in your genome that are being passed on to other generations. Half of your genome comes from bacteria. About 2 billion years ago, there were 2 cells that fused and created the eukaryote. And it was a complete mix-up of all genes. There were genes coming from completely different orders and different species. This happens all the time in nature. There's horizontal gene transfer, there's all of that. The actual act of genetic modification, the act of putting one gene into another organism, is in and of itself safe, but it depends on what you're doing. So if you take a gene which creates a toxin and put it in carrots, the carrots will be toxic. But the GMO is not dangerous, the toxin is dangerous. So it's important not to confuse the technology with what it could be used for. The technology itself, as far as all research shows, is safe. It's only, you can make something dangerous, but you can say the same about, you know, cars. I mean, you can make a combustion engine for a car, but you can also make it for a tank, and then the tank will be dangerous. But does that make the combustion engine bad? No, of course not. It depends what you use it for, if that helps. Or
how many genes are necessary for photosynthesis to take part? I mean, could we actually genetically modify us so that we could begin to become photosynthetic?
Well, it wouldn't work because of our architecture. I mean, we don't have enough surface area to make it worthwhile. But entertaining your question.
I could at least power my watch maybe from my bald head.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you never know. So the number of genes is not the easiest way I can answer that is think of what photosynthetic organism has the smallest genome, and it would probably be a bacteria, cyanobacteria or something like that. But not all of its genes are directly involved in photosynthesis. But you cannot separate one from another. You cannot take the photosynthetic system out of context and say it'll work on its own. It needs all those other genes to provide it with a cell. So, for example, a plant needs the genes for roots. Otherwise, it can't get water to the leaves, and then it can't do photosynthesis. So the system is completely integrated, so it's very hard to separate it out. If you were to put them into humans, then we would need also genes not just for photosynthesis, but for special types of pores to allow CO2 in, or else a CO2 uptake mechanism in our lungs to get CO2, or well, probably we'd produce enough CO2 from respiring. But I don't know, it's a very difficult thing to answer as a thought experiment. We'd probably also need organelles, chloroplasts, because as I was explaining earlier, photosynthesis is of itself a very dangerous process which must be tightly controlled. And plants have a special organelle called the chloroplast, this thing that glows, these melon-shaped green glowing things I was talking about. And that has its own DNA. It regulates its own machinery within itself, just like we have our mitochondria. Mitochondria also do dangerous high-energy reactions. They split things down to release energy from them. And people think that one of the reasons that these are kept separate is to protect the rest of the cell from them. So you would not only need the genes for the actual photosynthetic machinery, you'd need to build a chloroplast or something. So that would be really tricky. I would say ballpark figure about 5,000 genes, okay. I guess.
Yes, questions over there?
I think it's really interesting that you say it'd be impossible to just create photosynthesis on its own. It's too integrated into the life systems we know. I have a question for both you and the last speaker. How feasible do you think this would be with technology like chemical robots?
Please, go first. Ladies first.
Stand up.
I'm sorry, I was concentrated on my questions for you, so now I didn't listen to you. So what was the question?
Whether chemical robots can be used to make photosynthesis more efficient.
I have no idea in this moment.
There are people doing pretty cool research. There are two lines. There's some guys that are trying to literally build biological nanowires within cells which will transfer current generated by proton motive force, or basically when the light comes in, the plant can generate voltages across a membrane and transfer that to other parts of the cell. So you can kind of see that as a mishmash between robotics or industry or whatever and biology. And then there are other people which are saying, screw the whole system, photosynthesis is badly designed. It's an example of unintelligent design. You shouldn't use this enzyme or that enzyme. Let's redesign the whole thing. And there's a group in Israel that are doing this, and they're basically doing it in silico at the moment, which is they take databases of all the known enzymes, what conditions do they work under, what reactions do they do, what substrates do they have, and then try to build new pathways which will take CO2 and make sugar, without using some of the enzymes that we already know are inefficient. And they've designed a few, and now they're trying to make them biologically. So it's a kind of, what's the new buzzword is, there's a word for this. Synthetic biology, thank you. This is the new thing, you'll read about this idea of building with biology, instead of using the classical concept of engineering, which relies on maybe electrical circuits, instead use biological organisms. You had a
question.
Any questions from the audience? Oh, sorry.
My question was maybe stupid. I am just curious, are there any changes in oxygen levels in winter and summer? Because now trees have no leaves, so no...
There is a change in CO2. So if you ever look at the Keeling curve, you see CO2 goes like this because every time it drops down is summer in the northern hemisphere because there's literally more land in the northern hemisphere, so there's more plants there. And you can see that quite clearly. But CO2 is only 400 parts per million. Oxygen is a huge number. Probably it does fluctuate, but you're talking about such a tiny, I don't know, but I guess it does because if CO2's going down, it must be taking oxygen with it, or up, sorry, vice versa. I don't know, but I'm guessing, but it will be really small amount when you compare it to the total amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. Like even if we burn all the fossil fuels, our oxygen levels will decline, but still by like 1-2%, because most of the world's carbon is not in coal or oil, it's in limestone and shale and things like that.
Any questions from the audience? Anyone brave enough? Yes?
Yes.
Thank you.
Previously, you said that photosynthesis is actually quite dangerous for the plants, for bacteria. And when you increase the level of photosynthesis, I ask is it more dangerous for the plant, if it could actually kill it, and if yes, how, which are possible options to solve that problem?
Yeah, very good question. The plants already have inbuilt a hell of a lot of protective mechanisms over the evolutionary time span. So photosynthesis goes back like 3 billion years or more. And in tandem with the evolution of photosynthesis, there's lots of what they call photoprotective mechanisms. So plants have special ways of, if they start to lose control, they uncouple the light harvesting antennae from the reaction center. They literally pull them apart, so then the energy just goes back out as light, and then they don't get a problem. So all of those systems are already there. There are actually people who are trying to prevent plants protecting themselves because plants are over-conservative. They're really careful about damage. But we don't, as, say, people growing crops, we don't really mind if there's a bit of damage as long as we get higher yield. So under most conditions, it will be fine. So some people are trying to reduce the amount the plants protect themselves in order to increase the amount of energy that actually goes into yield. Because every time the plants uncouple or do other things to protect themselves, energy is lost. And we want all the energy possible into the food or the harvestable component for the biofuel or whatever. So there are some people actually trying to reduce how much plants protect themselves. And there are also people who are thinking about increasing it because they want to grow plants in much more stressful environments. Where there's maybe less water, much higher light intensities. There's people thinking about space expeditions and stuff where you have much more UV, and then they're thinking of how do we enhance what's already there, if that kind of answers your question.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you for it. Michael, you okay?
I need a coffee. Coffee.
You already had
coffee.
two at lunch.
No, I need another coffee, Katka.
Why?
I haven't slept for 3 days, 4 days. I need a coffee.
Why the hell not?
I'm trying to limit the amount of melatonin in my body. Coffee.
Oh, I know what's going on.
Coffee.
You've been reading the papers again, haven't you?
Coffee. I want a coffee. I'm going to get coffee.
To explain what he's on about, please welcome Joanna Bagniewska from Poland.
Who here feels like they could use more sleep? But would you be so keen to take a nap, gentlemen in the audience, if I told you that sleep could shrink your testicles? Before you panic, bear with me for 3 minutes. Let's start with sleep itself. We are wired to sleep at night. But how do our bodies know when night is? In our eyes, there are photoreceptors, cells which differentiate light from dark. Fair enough, but how would our liver or kidneys know the difference between day and night? Well, when it's dark, Photoreceptors send the signal to the brain, to the pineal gland, which starts the production of melatonin. Melatonin is a hormone of the night. It's a chemical expression of darkness. It flows through our blood and lets all our organs know that it's dark and it's time to go to bed. Because of that, in many countries, melatonin is sold as a supplement for people suffering from insomnia. However, some time ago, a study was conducted where melatonin was fed to hamsters. Worryingly enough, after the melatonin intake, the hamsters' testicles shrunk. This news hit the media and panic ensued. You can imagine the tabloid headlines. Men, if you take melatonin sleeping pills, your balls will be the size of peanuts. But will they really? Let's go back to the study. If we feed hamsters more and more melatonin, it's a sign for their bodies that the periods of darkness, i.e. night, are getting longer and longer. And what does it mean when nights are getting longer and longer? Well, winter is coming. And in winter, hamsters, like many other mammals, would undergo what is called daily torpor. Their metabolism slows down. Because it's cold and food is scarce, they shut down all the non-essential parts of their body, such as testicles. After all, in winter, a male hamster is focused on survival and not impressing the ladies. So, yes, in hamsters, melatonin does cause testicles to shrink. But does that also hold true for humans? Well, no. We don't hibernate in winter, so men's testes are the same size throughout the year. So I have two take-home messages for you. First of all, be very cautious when interpreting the results of animal research, because they're not always directly applicable to humans. And secondly, gentlemen, you can sleep soundly. Your gonads shall remain safe.
Any questions about sleep deprivation, gonads, melatonin,
Animals.
hamsters, animals? Anything at all? Yes, sir.
Do they still like give out melatonin as a treatment for insomnia, or
Yes.
did the tabloids kill that?
No, melatonin is used quite commonly as an insomnia treatment, and this is something that people who travel a lot might buy. It's not available in all countries, so in the UK, for instance, it's not legal. It would have other side effects. So, for instance, it's associated sometimes with mood swings because this hormone of darkness can be associated with depression. So people who live near the North Pole, for instance, who suffer from extensive periods of darkness would fall to depression more often. And so having this extensive melatonin production could be linked to that. But apart from that, if you're traveling a lot, you don't want to have jet lag, you only take melatonin in small doses, you'll be fine.
Does that mean that other substances which sometimes people take recreationally and they get sort of a lifting of a mood, does that inhibit it? Does that work by inhibiting the production of melatonin? Or?
No, well, I think there are quite a lot of complex reactions. It depends what substances you're talking about, really.
I don't have no idea.
I can't think of anything that would inhibit melatonin specifically. I think it's more of a, I don't know, an adrenaline boost or something. But
is melatonin, is that just a monoamine that's produced in the brain, or what else? Where is it produced, actually?
It's produced in the pineal gland in the brain, yes.
Does caffeine somehow affect the production of melatonin, or the effects? Because when you drink coffee and you intake caffeine, obviously you get kind of a high in a way.
I think, and don't quote me on this because I'm not a chemist. You're a chemist, you should answer that. It's a stimulant rather than a suppressor. So I think rather than suppressing the activity of melatonin, it would stimulate your body.
Any questions in the audience? Yes.
Yeah, if I can ask, why did you become a zoologist? When did you make that choice?
Why did I become a zoologist? I just figured that animals are really cool, and I wanted to know more about them. So yeah, there you go. I started off doing general biology, and then because we did a lot of work in the labs, I figured that if I can't see something, I have a hard time believing that it's there. So I then went on to working with bigger things, whole organisms. Ideally, they should be furry and very cute. It's a very important part of your choosing your research model animal.
She's got a cute story about a hedgehog. I heard it at lunchtime. It was nice.
In 2 minutes. No, rescue a hedgehog in my family who woke up in the middle of a mild winter. It was a nice animal that we kept for a few months before releasing it back in spring. And it would, when a hedgehog feels safe, it puts down all the spikes and it flops on its back and lets you rub its belly, and it's just very cute. Don't go waking up hedgehogs, but if one wakes up in the middle of winter, if it will get cold later, maybe look after it. If you don't know what to do with it, just maybe take it to the local zoo, they'll tell you what to do.
Okay, we have a question there.
Yeah, so you talk about melatonin as the sort of the hormone of the dark, or dark hormone. I heard that if you take melatonin and are exposed to light, specifically more blue light, it can be actually quite negative. Is this because of a mismatch, or do you know anything more about that?
Well, in general, when you're exposed to light, the melatonin in your body is not being produced. And so I think what's happening is there's a conflict with what your receptors get and what your brain wants to produce and what you ingest and what you get in your blood because of that. So this could be a conflicting effect. But it's interesting when, for instance, you can measure melatonin levels throughout the night of a person or an animal when you take saliva samples. When somebody wakes up, turns on the light, immediately the melatonin levels would drop. So this is something that reacts very, very fast. So if you have trouble sleeping, you wake up in the middle of the night and you want to go back to sleep again, you don't want to turn on the light, because immediately your entire body will think, oh, okay, daytime, going awake, melatonin level goes down. So stay in the dark if you have trouble falling asleep again.
But is it true that to produce enough melatonin at night, you should expose yourself to light during the day, sufficient amounts? Otherwise you have problems with...
I don't know if it works on a contrast basis, but I suppose you do need some sort of a baseline. This is why sometimes blind people who don't have photoreceptors, because there are people who do have photoreceptors, but they're just not connected to the brain part responsible for the vision. They sometimes have trouble waking up at the right time, because they don't have this baseline of when the day is. They don't recognize, their eyes don't recognize when the light comes in.
Anyone else, any questions? Yes, gentleman in the back.
I have heard that our body height depends on the light. How much light does we have? Is it true?
Sorry,
that
can you...
Our body height.
Oh, body height.
Body height depends on the light. How much light does we have?
You mean the happiness of your...
No,
the height.
The height.
I think it could be linked to vitamin D production and the effect of sunlight. And it's generally a developmental thing, maybe not necessarily just the height, but how well your body develops. But that... I don't think that would be linked to melatonin, but to vitamin D, which is synthesized, the synthesis of which is stimulated by sunlight. So I don't know if it's explicitly height or just development, but I have also heard of that link.
Is taking a nap in the afternoon bad or okay? Or
I love them.
You take them too?
Yeah, sometimes you wake up the next day, but sometimes...
So it's okay, because sometimes I've read, not sort of scientific accounts, but there's I don't know, pieces in magazines where they might say that it's very important to go to bed at the same time as you, you know, try to have a regular system where you're going to the bed regularly at the same time and you're getting up regularly at the same time, and whether that's true or whether it doesn't really matter, or whether having a siesta is good or bad, or...
It depends, because we're living in a world where there's more to it than just our own body, right? So you've got your friends, you've got your work, you've got your schedule, and for instance, people have done studies on the day-night cycles of people working, for instance, in the city in London, and they work hard and then they party hard. And so the difference, the time difference in their day-night cycle between weekdays and the weekends is similar to what would happen if they were traveling from New York and back, because there was such a difference in how late they stay up and then how late they get up in the next morning. So ideally, yes, you should have a fairly regular cycle. Also, ideally, it should also be linked to sunlight. But what can you do in winter? We would be going to bed in half an hour, and that's not realistic. We need to go to work, we've got our own things to do, so we just have to soldier through. And again, we've got electricity, which acts as a stimulant for us to wake up a little bit.
Yes? Yeah.
If somebody stays a longer time in darkness, would it have some influence on his life, or would it be dangerous? Or
so, because I'm a zoologist and not a medic, I don't want to make big predictions with humans, and I don't want you to go home and think, if I stay up all night, I'm going to die tomorrow, or that's probably not going to happen. But in animals, for instance, that does have a very big effect. Both staying in the darkness for a long period of time and also staying in the light for the entire time. Because when, as I told you with hamsters, they go into the hibernation period. But some animals have their reproductive cycle that's governed by the length of the daylight. Because when you're an animal, you really want to have stability in life, and you want to have a success in reproduction. So you want to have babies when it's spring, when there's a lot of food coming around. How do you know when there's spring? Well, the most reliable predictor is daylight. And so, for instance, sheep, who have quite a short pregnancy time, about half a year or so, they would become sexually active half a year before spring, more or less. So when the days are getting shorter and shorter. So if you keep your sheep at the same level of darkness, they will not start reproducing. And similarly, when you have animals in zoos, for instance, you might have endangered species and you're trying to get them to reproduce because there are only a few of these animals in the world, and you're really trying hard, and you don't notice that the enclosure that they're in is right next to a lamppost. And so these animals live with a constant level of light, and that affects their reproduction. And so no matter how hard you try, these animals will not become sexually active, so they will not start reproducing. So this is a consideration that you need to make in breeding programs, both with wildlife and with domestic species. So sheep, for instance, do get fed melatonin if a farmer wants to have them breeding at the same time. And that can stimulate the ovulation. With humans, as I said before, there have been links to depression and staying in the darkness, but apart from that, I would be very hesitant to make any other predictions, because I'm more on the animal side than the human side.
You did mention the melatonin in connection with depression, so that might be one of the effects of being in the dark and having more melatonin being produced in your body.
Yes.
Anyone else? Yes.
Why are panda bears so reluctant to reproduce? Or is that a myth?
Oh, the panda. This is such a loser species. Oh, I shouldn't
Controversy.
say that, because on one hand they're wonderful because everybody loves the panda because they're so cute and they're black and white, and why don't we give a lot of money for the panda? And because they're black and white, they look good in print, so you don't have to spend a lot of money on color printing, and you can publish the WWF documents, and everybody's happy with that. So brilliant in terms of conservation for getting money. It's kind of like the Miss World of endangered species. You have the panda and everybody pays attention. But in reproductive terms, they're hopeless. So as you said, they just don't want to have sex. I don't know why. And when they do have sex, they do magically, miraculously give birth to their young, they sit on it. And so squash it. And you think, how bad a mother do you need to be to not notice your baby? Just, sat on it. Not to mention that they only eat specific species of bamboo, which are rare as gold dust to find to feed them. So I think it's a bit of a dead-end species. But you can still support WWF and save other endangered wildlife. But similarly, some rhinoceros species would also be similar in that if you have a male and a female and they meet each other not during the estrus, so not when the female is sexually active, they just attack each other and kill each other. You think, how do you know if you're sexually reproductive without even coming close, without attacking each other straight away? So when you work in captive breeding programs, things get really messy. So yeah, I think many people would want to know why pandas don't want to have sex. It would help save a lot of money.
Is it their simple diet?
I don't know, bamboo.
Maybe they had a bit of red meat in there. They could perhaps get a bit more.
Maybe.
Or a bit of panda porn. I don't know. Yeah.
Well,
that's what they have. Yeah.
That's what they have. I think
yes,
they might be.
Yes.
Okay.
They do.
Thank you very much.
I'm not sure how many of you actually know this, but Katja has just started university in England. And Katja, how's university going?
It's pretty good.
Yeah? You having a good time?
Work hard, play hard.
Work hard, play hard. And I don't know, is there any juicy details?
Well,
I mean,
yeah, but it's a secret. Like, you can't tell anyone if I tell you. Okay? Anyone.
Like, yeah, I can keep secrets.
No, you have to promise.
Well, yeah, I mean,
you have to swear on boring chemistry.
I swear on the big boron chemist in the sky, I will not tell anybody. Pinky swear.
All right.
Okay, tell me. Oh my God, she's pregnant!
What? Michael! You said you wouldn't tell anyone.
Katja, promise me one thing. One thing.
Just like you promised me.
One thing. When it comes, you got to phone Matthias and get him to do that mass spec thing on the baby.
Who do what?
The mass spec thing. Matthias Kreet.
Who?
He's the winner of this year's National Czech Fame Lab. Hey, he'll tell you some more, okay? Matthias, prosím.
Dear friends of science, you are probably wondering if it's a boy or a girl. But what you should be wondering is if it's a healthy boy or a healthy girl. Our patients are newborns suffering from disorders in purine de novo synthesis. Purines are organic compounds that serve as the basic building blocks of our DNA. These symptoms have neurological manifestations and include delayed development, seizures, and autism manifestation. These symptoms are common for many other diseases, and therefore the correct diagnosis is very important in order to prevent wrong treatment. Our aim is to find those diseases before they manifest themselves. Ideally, we would use some method which will show us that there is something wrong with the baby, right, by using some suitable biological material like, oh yeah, like urine. Okay, here we have a sample from a potential patient. And now we have to collect samples from healthy controls. Yeah, miss, you sitting with your legs crossed. May I ask you, please, could you pee into this tube for me? Or you, please, would thank you very much. And you, sir, would you be so kind and provide the sample for me? And I will create one sample myself. Ah, perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Wow, you really needed to go, didn't you? Thanks. You are very kind. So now we will analyze all the samples. First, the samples from our healthy controls, and then the sample from our potential patient. For this purpose, we will use mass spectrometer, or as I like to call it, major mass spec. This machine can precisely measure molecular mass of wide range of substances and provide us other detailed information about them. From that, we can calculate the concentration of compounds in the urine of healthy controls and find where they range, and compare those data with the sample from our potential patient. Oh no! Here we can see high levels of succinylaminoamine carboxyamide ribose. Hurry up! We have to go to the doctor and tell him that your disorders are based on the purine denable synthesis problem. Have a nice time.
Any questions? Just to clarify, I'm not pregnant. Okay, just a skit. Not pregnant. Any questions?
Who knows what a mass spec is? The lady at the back. No, you don't count. You can't count. You're FameLab experts. There was a hand up here. Okay, tell us what a mass spec. What do you know about a mass spec device?
There's a complicated question.
Well, yeah, it's not easy to explain in simple words, but it has to do with measuring the mass of the compounds on the solution in order to identify different kind of chemicals.
We've come full circle now. We're asking the audience.
Is that a good answer?
Yeah, basically that's what the mass spectrometer does, and I will just say that you have first of all, when you are putting a sample into the mass spectrometer, you have to give this compound, the compounds you are measuring, a charge, which is very important for the analysis, and then because the charge of the molecule pulls in this molecule inside the mass spectrometer, and for example, some of them work in the direction that depends. That there's a magnetic field inside the mass spectrometer, and the direction is curved, which means that based on the mass of the molecule and its charge, it turns differently based on the mass, and then comes to the detector, and the detector makes very nice catches the very nice spectrum of a molecule and shows you the intensity of mass of each molecule. The complication is that there are a lot of molecules which have same mass, and then you have to use other approaches to solve these types of troubles.
Any questions?
Ladies, how would you feel about having your babies analysed immediately after birth? Is that something you would want, or is that something you perhaps don't want? Do you think there's a danger that we're learning too much too soon, and that puts all sorts of funny thoughts of fear and danger into your heads? What's your opinions on that?
Actually, it's already happening.
Tell us.
If you like or not, right after the birth, the doctors take samples from the baby and screen 13 diseases, which is very good for the health of your baby. For example, if your baby suffers from phenylketonuria, it's a disease when you can't eat this amino acid. So you get the diet right after the birth, and it really saves the health of your baby, and it prevents serious neurological troubles. So if we develop the new method, we can maybe also analyze some samples before the delivery, and already know how to care about the baby as a potential patient. We recently published a paper where we can extract the succinylaminoimine carboxyamide ribose from the dry blood spot, which is taken from the Achilles of each one of us, and they are stored somewhere. So if you would like to know your levels, we just can pick up those 15, 20, 30 years old dry blood spots and extract the compounds from it and measure them by mass spec and tell you the concentration of these compounds. But they will be probably very low because all of you look very good.
Yes, question over there.
Matthias, can the mass spectrometer be used to diagnose the illness diseases also for adults? Why do you focus on children, on newborns? Yeah,
that's because I'm working at the Institute of Inherited Metabolic Disorders, and because we follow the disorders in the family, and that's the prediction why I'm studying babies, because we get mostly the newborn babies cases which we solve at our department, so that's why babies.
Is it used anywhere for other kind of diseases for adults?
Yes, actually there's a disease, homocysteine urea, which is analyzed by adults by mass spectrometer methods. And the problem with the analysis is that you can calculate the concentration right from the data about the intensity of your signal, because you can compare populations and find that some has low intensity and some high, but you know how high or how low. So you have to synthesize a standard compound in organic or inorganic laboratory. You create this compound, which is normally running in your body, and then you measure the known concentration, and you get the information about the intensity. So if you can make a nice calibration curve, and then from the intensity you get from your controls or patients, you already fit in the curve and can tell the range and how severe is the disease.
Okay, thank you, Matthias. Thank you.
One more question at the back.
The young lady at the back.
I would like to ask which causes the problem of vet producing of purines, if something which happens during the pregnancy, for example, can influence this vet production of purines, or is it in genes? Or?
Yes, the purines are synthesized in body in 10-step reactions, so 10-step reaction, which means that in each of those reactions can appear a problem. Right now there are known 2 diseases. There are two enzymes which are broken. So we already know that how to describe those 2 diseases, and we are still searching for more of them. So the trouble with the synthesis is caused by the damaged protein, the damaged enzyme, and of course during when you get a damaged protein or enzyme, there are several steps where can the trouble occur. Mostly, for example, you can have a DNA mutation, and this happens when you are exposed to carcinogenic compounds, if you drink alcohol during pregnancy, and all the stuff you are advised not to do. But if there is some special case, really, like don't climb mountains because you will get purine disorders.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Matthias, for all your answers. Katja,
Okay, so
I want to ask you something. No, show you something.
Michael, we're presenting. See, people?
Just
right here?
Just pretend they're not here. Just for a minute. Look, I want to show you something, but you have to come under here with me.
Show me what exactly?
Well, you know, don't worry, you'll like it. Come here. Come under here with me. Come on.
Michael.
Just pretend they're not there. Come on. Come here.
What do you want to show me exactly?
It's scientific. Come here.
If you say so.
Oh, come on. You'll like it.
Michael, I can't see a thing.
You can't see that?
No, what am I supposed to see?
What do you mean you can't see that? I can
can't
see it brilliantly.
Anything.
But it's brilliant. I can see it.
How come?
Well, because I've got these new super duper photon intensifiers.
Pretty cool, I must admit.
Yeah.
How do they work?
I do not know. But luckily, there's Anna Stelke from Germany who does know how they work, and she's going to tell us about them. So, ladies and gentlemen, from Germany, Anna Stelke.
Please welcome the Queen of the Night, master of seeing in the dark, who can still fly around when the sky is only illuminated by stars. I'm sure you all guessed it, I'm talking about a moth, and how this particular moth, the elephant hawk moth, can see so well at night. But first, why is it actually so hard for us to see well when the light is very low? Follow me onto a journey into the eyes, where we find the light detectors or photoreceptors. They detect light particles or photons, and if they do this well, we can see well. And during the day, this is no problem. During the day, there are billions and billions of photons. And the photoreceptors, they feel a bit like if they're standing in a massive shower of photons. I just substituted the light particles for water particles, so you could feel it's really no problem detecting such a strong signal during the day. During the night, however, there are only very few photons. And the poor photoreceptors feel a bit like you would when you're out on a gray day and you get hit by one raindrop, and then nothing. And then you start wondering, did I really feel something now, or did I imagine it? Is it raining? So seeing at night is so hard because there's so few of these photons drizzling in, and the photoreceptors' detection becomes very unreliable. Now, how does my moth solve this problem? I'm afraid it's not super duper photon enhancer. It's quite a cool trick that they got from a principle that has been postulated by the great scientists. The Beatles. I get by with a little help from my friends, because I'm actually investigating neurons, nerve cells, in the brain of this moth that get help from their friends. They're exchanging information with neighboring neurons about the photons, and that works a bit like when you're out on the gray day where you get hit by the one raindrop, and you have your friends with you, because what do you do when in doubt about your perception? You ask around, hey, did anybody else feel a raindrop? And if one or two of your friends also felt something, you can be sure you didn't imagine it, but it's actually starting to rain. So you can make your detection more reliable by exchanging information with neighboring detectors, being it about raindrops or about photons. We call this principle of exchanging information with neighboring detectors spatial summation, and this is what my moth is doing in her brain to see better at night. Now you might wonder, who on earth wants to know how moths see the world? For example, companies that develop camera systems to help us drive our cars. They should work at night. And they can use this principle of spatial summation in the software of the camera to make them more sensitive, and thus benefit from the tricks of the Queen of the Night. So remember, life is easier with a little bit of help from our friends, and so is vision at night.
Thank you, Anna. So, yes, super duper photon intensifiers or spatial summation. Does anybody have a question about?
Yes. Back. So with a spatial summation, are there mechanisms like that that would work, for instance, in touch or other senses in the body?
Oh, yes. And well, I'm actually not sure about, well, touch also has, basically it's getting many detectors to group to one output, if you want. So you get the information from many neighboring detectors into one output. And in sensory biology, we would call this perception of all the receptors, or together a receptive field. And in touch or in vision, you can have different sizes of these receptive fields. They are also related to how high the resolution of your senses. So if you do the spatial summation, for example, in the moth, and you group many detectors, you let them exchange information, you lose resolution because you make this field from which you get information much bigger. So yes, you can find it in other senses too.
Any questions? Yes?
So you say, for example, with the touch, you get an integrated signal from all these detectors, and that's kind of what the spatial summation is. But then there must be, it must also be possible to have separate signals from all of the detectors, so non-integrated. Does the integration occur in the eye, or does it occur in the brain?
That depends on what animal you're looking at. So in my moths, it generally occurs in the brain. In the eye, basically, you only have the detectors, and then the signals go to the brain, and then all the processing happens in the brain. In vertebrates, including us humans, it's a bit different. We have a lot of processing that already happens in the eye in what we call the retina, which is basically the layer in the back of your eye that we equivalent with a sensor in a camera. It's much more than a sensor. It doesn't only have the photoreceptors or the detectors in there, but it has a lot of other types of neurons that already do processing. So in us humans, this spatial summation already happens in the eye, and especially in the periphery of the eye. There we group many of these detectors to one common signal, whereas in the center of our vision, what we call the fovea, we have generally one detector that relates its signal into the brain. So that's how we keep the resolution in the center of our eye, and then in the periphery we have more grouping occurring.
Any other questions?
Anna, I find it very nice that you say often, my moth, this is very nice. And I would like you to explain whatever aspects you want of the relationship of a scientist who studies animals, any kind of animal. So, how would you describe your relationship with moths?
It's funny because my personal relationship didn't start too well. When I got my professor asked me if I want to do this PhD, on moths. I was like, I don't like insects, and they have too many legs, and they crawl around, and so I had to really develop my personal relationship to this moth, because I couldn't even touch them in the beginning. I found them far too fluffy. But then, especially these moths, and this is not a joke, they really look like this. They're a bit smaller, about this big. They are genuinely green and pink. And being a girl, that made it very easy to start liking them. They look very fluffy and they're pink, and you get a very personal relationship to them at some point. Yeah, I love them. And I can touch them now.
You can't stop now.
No.
Any questions? Yes, lady at the back, purple.
So what about other animals, night animals? Is there the same system in its head?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we find it, I'm mostly looking at moths because most of the moth species are night active, so it's just a very nice animal to look at, and it's relatively simple. But you find it in many other night active insects. As much as we've looked at them, we haven't looked at that many, or other people haven't looked at that many. But you find the same principle in human eyes, in cat eyes, in bat eyes, and whatever kind of vertebrate you want to look at. Not just night active ones, actually. Also, day active animals have it to some degree, especially in the periphery of their vision. But it's much stronger in night active animals. But it's a very common principle in, yeah.
So does the moth being able to see at night, is that due of being better at it than, say, humans or some other mammals? Is it due to better photoreceptors or better summation going on in the brain?
Good question. It's a lot of things, as very often. It has very sensitive eyes. Like if you compare it to butterflies or bees, if we take something that's more comparable to a moth than a human, the eyes of the moth are very special. They let much more light in, and thus tackle the problem of having very few photons at the start, in that they try to get as many photons as possible so that they don't run into problems. So they have very special eyes. They have very sensitive photoreceptors that are generally bigger, so they can, for example, sample more of these photons than a small photoreceptor, and then they have all the neuronal processing, the spatial summation on top of that. So they have many different adaptations to make them sensitive.
Thank you. And if nobody else has any questions, thank you very much.
You like it with your moth?
Yes.
How you feeling?
Not great. All these people are making me nervous. I think I need a bit of liquid courage. Do you have anything?
You feeling nervous? What you mean? You want a little shot, little Dutch courage? I'll be back. I think I got something in my bag. Got something. I've got something here. I've got something out there. Here you go with the.
Do you have that?
What's good? I'm feeling really heavy.
You okay there?
What?
What's wrong? Come on, stand up.
You've done the dark matter thing on me again. I can't believe you've done the dark matter thing on me again. I can feel this amazing gravitational pull. But you promised me you'd never do the dark matter thing. Help.
Well, as much as watching you being destroyed by the gravitational pull of the dark matter, let's crack on. Next speaker is from Romania. Please welcome Bogdan Gheorghiu.
Good afternoon, everybody. Would you like to know exactly what dark matter is? Well, so would I, actually. It even sounds mysterious, doesn't it? Dark matter. Like it was taken from a story filled with knights, wizards, and dragons. But that's not what it is about, unfortunately for all of the Lord of the Rings fans here. There are only two problems with the name dark matter. The word dark and the word matter. The word dark doesn't actually mean dark. It means we have no idea what it is. It's the same with the dark energy. The word matter is very misleading because we don't know what it is. How can we say it's matter? We can only see the effects it has on other visible objects in the universe. A better name for it would be unexplained gravity, because you'll see that's actually what it is. In our universe, stuff likes to orbit other heavier stuff. That's just how it is. The moon orbits the Earth orbits the sun orbits the center of our galaxy, and even galaxies orbit a common center of mass. But there's a speed limit to it. Imagine I was rotating a ball on a chain like this. The faster the ball is moving, the stronger my grip needs to be to keep it rotating. My grip now is the gravity. If the ball is moving too fast, my strength will no longer be enough, and it will fly off and hit one of you in the head. This is pretty intuitive. But scientists, when they look at the galaxy, for example, the stars closer to the edge are moving way too fast. They are moving so fast, actually, that they shouldn't be orbiting anymore. They should be flying off God knows where into intergalactic space. But they aren't. Gravity keeps them in orbit. But whose gravity? That's the mystery. Because we look at the visible stuff in any galaxy, we calculate their mass, we add it all up, and we get 8 times less gravity than we should. 8 times less. Where is the rest coming from? There must be something else hidden in there that has 8 times more mass than the entire visible galaxy. And that something is what we call dark matter. These mysterious sources of huge amounts of gravity. No wizards, no dragons, but still absolutely fascinating. And I personally can't wait until we solve this mystery completely. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we've got 8 times more gravitational pulls in this amazing universe of ours than we should do compared, well, we take into our scope only
our galaxy is 10.
light-emitting matter. So, who has a question about that? Who's deeply scared of dark matter and wants to know more?
You mentioned that I didn't know about is, so galaxies orbit something else. What is it what's bigger than a galaxy that galaxies orbit?
There's a misconception that when we talk about an orbit, we talk about a lighter object that goes around a heavier object. That's not exactly true. They are both orbiting their common center of mass. So let's take the Earth and the Sun, for example. Earth goes around the Sun, but the Sun wobbles a bit too. So the center of gravity isn't the center of the Sun. It's a little bit off to the center. So the Sun is wobbling, and the Earth is going around it. If we have 2 stars that have comparable masses, they dance around each other, around their common center of mass. So we can take that principle to the galactic level. So galaxies orbit their common center of mass. So we have local groups of galaxies which dance around each other.
And then one last question, just why don't they just crash into each other? Why do they keep spinning around?
Speed.
What gives them that?
Why doesn't a plane fall? Actually,
the
a
plane doesn't fall because of
may
engines.
fall. No, you can't expect to turn down the engine of a plane while flying and then expect nothing bad to happen. So gravity always wants to bring things together, non-stop. But if you have speed, you practically miss the other object or the center of gravity that pulls you in. You miss it constantly. You constantly miss it because you have speed. So the Sun is here, Earth wants to go right over there to that door. But because the Sun is pulling it towards itself, and then the Earth wants to go there, they get into a perfect balance and they go into a circle or an ellipse.
And because there's no friction out there, then it can't slow down.
It won't slow down. That's the explanation. If the Sun suddenly disappeared, Earth would just go fly off into a direction tangent to where it was.
You know what? As a chemist, I reckon you physicists haven't sussed out gravity yet. I think the problem is gravity. I think we just don't understand at all what gravity really is. I mean, when Newton was first describing the apple falling down, this attractive force between 2 objects, okay, you can conceptualize that. And then this attempt to explain it using quantum theory, and therefore there'd have to be a particle, the graviton, which nobody can find. And then there was published recently evidence of gravitational waves, which was then said not to be true. So, I think, isn't it the case we just do not really understand gravity? And will that not eventually open up what is this dark matter?
Well, as a physicist...
We're in trouble now.
I'm sure chemists have been wrong or have had theories that had to be improved over time, too. So that's science. You have a theory, and then another piece of evidence comes along, and you improve that theory or even throw it out.
Yeah.
So our understanding of the universe, and in this case, gravity, is constantly improving, let's hope. And maybe in 5 years, we will have an explanation of dark matter, which improves the theory of gravity as well. Or maybe dark matter is actually, I don't know, some obscure particle or some obscure substance that we don't know anything about. Maybe chemists should find that out.
But to link on to what you said about why don't the planets just fall into the Sun? I mean, at the beginning of the last century, when there was a debate about the structure of atoms, and the big question was, why do electrons not fall into the nucleus? And then that's when people started to talk about more like, the first steps into quantum mechanics, the first steps into understanding, to quantify electromagnetic theories. And in the end, the solution comes in using mathematics based on probabilities. So in fact, the electron has a probability of being in the center of the nucleus, and then but then we calculate where the probabilities could possibly be. Of course, you can never determine exactly where it's going to be.
Exactly.
Is there something possible there for gravity, that there are these probabilistic things that, I don't know, I mean, does that set off any
Right now,
neurons?
the theory of relativity, which would explain gravity, and the quantum mechanics do not exactly match. So they contradict each other. The theory of the physics of the big and the physics of the small do not sync together well.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to find a theory of everything that could explain both quantum mechanics and gravity. But right now we don't have it. String theory looks promising, but it's not. It's hard to prove it. It's hard to test it.
There was an article published not long ago about quantum mechanics, and that the effects that we see and can't predict of the quantum behavior is determined and caused by parallel universes interacting with each other. Have you read that by any chance?
It's hard to say parallel universe exists or do not exist because you can't test it. So maybe it's a theory. We have to wait for evidence for it.
It's a good point. It's a good point, though. Maybe it's parallel universes existing in dimensions that we can't conceive, which are actually acting as gravitational forces on this dimension, on this space-time.
If anyone wants to check it out, the theory is called Many Interacting Worlds Theory, so MIW theory. If you type that into Google, I'm sure you'll get a lot of hits, and the math is quite mind-boggling. But
there is actually
really
a theory that says parallel universe could explain the dark matter. Actually, the dark matter wouldn't exist, and all the missing gravity, all the unexplained gravity, comes from a parallel universe. Theories.
Makes sense.
Yes, we have a question over there.
Yeah. Bogdan, sometimes hearing this, sometimes I think that we are our technology is not well enough compared to our theories. What I mean is that we are able to create wonderful theories such as the ones you describe, quantum mechanics, string fields, parallel universe, and so on, for example in physics, but in many other fields. But our technology is not yet able to prove them right or prove them wrong. I'm going to ask you a difficult question. Then, if this is so, if you agree, why should someone study pure science and not focus on creating new technologies?
Well, it's a teamwork. We need both theoretical physicists and engineers. So.
To that, I'd say that sometimes when you come up with theories, they can spark an idea in engineers and experimental physicists and experimental scientists that actually make them think of, oh, that's an interesting idea, how could we prove it? And that leads to actually technological advances. So it's give and take. You need both sides, basically.
And that's just physics and engineering, but you can have physics and chemistry and biology. So.
Lots of opportunities for young scientists.
For me, I mean, what do you think? For me, if there's people like this young man thinking about trying to explain dark matter, isn't that fabulous, just in itself? I mean, I'd love to know what dark matter is. I mean, it's mind-blowing for me to hear that the vast majority of the gravitational forces we see in our universe cannot be explained by matter that we can see that emits light. And that's an amazing fact. And just for the explanation, that's enough for me. I'm happy to pay my small amount of tax, which goes to this research. But just for that, I don't need anything more. Just what do you think? Are you interested as taxpayers in paying a small amount of tax for people who are interested in answering very, interesting questions such as what is dark matter? Would you agree? Are you for it? Or do you think scientists should only concentrate their talents on very tangential things, very sort of technological-based things? What do you think?
It's better than putting our taxes in the banks.
Seriously, I mean, who would be who is interested in knowing the question of what hands up? Who would like to support people thinking about that? Great. And who of you thinks it's ridiculous? It's not worth the.
Who'd rather spend it on banks?
I promise I won't get mad. So
yeah.
Close your eyes. Close your eyes. He's not looking. You can show the hands now.
Yeah, but it would be nice to have a voice against.
Because believe you me, there are a lot of powerful voices against that. I think certainly as a scientist working in the Czech Republic now, there is a huge pressure to do things which have direct tangential use, or it's just not, it's not. And there's a huge sort of very successful lobbying group, I think, in supporting biological, medicinal research, and that the rest is almost irrelevant. And if you're interested about trying to understand dark matter, for example, well, that's just not worth the public expenses, which of course I think is ridiculous. In fact, it's a disappointingly ignorant point of view, which is unfortunately the point of view of many powerful people.
Just a second. Have you heard about NASA and what it has done for humans' curiosity? Well, if we consider the dollar, the income dollar that an American pays for, because America pays for NASA, if we consider the dollar, 0.6 cents per American are given to NASA. So 0.6 cents, not even an entire cent, is given to NASA. And it has done wonderful discoveries. It has made wonderful discoveries and wonderful progress. And it's not that much of much
if
money.
you want to learn more about science funding, there's a program that Past FameLab created called Scienceogram. Have you all heard about the Rosetta landing?
Yeah.
Philae, yes. Show of hands? No? Yeah. Well, some of you.
Well,
there's actually, it's just been posted in Czech, an infographic about how much that actually cost per person, that mission, and it cost just over €1 billion, but when you look at how long, over the period of time, how much every person in Europe, every inhabitant of a country that participates in ESSA, it comes down to about 20 cents per year per person, which isn't a lot. So, and it's done amazing things, landing on a comet, huge step forward for mankind. So, science funding.
I just wanted to comment on the dichotomy you were placing between basic research because it's inspiring and beautiful versus applied research because we need it. And I want to point out that basic research is about exploring, and very often it leads to applied spin-offs. Things like the internet, lasers, for example, they all came from basic research driven purely by curiosity and wanting to know more about the universe that we live in. And they give very practical solutions to our lives that we could never think of if we only focused on applied research. Only by going out there and exploring can we get these discoveries. So I think it's also very important that people realize that basic research, in a way, is also applied. It's just not, we don't know how it's going to be applied yet.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, any questions? Yes.
Sometimes parts of in physics behave similar as people behave. Would it be helpful to cooperate with psychology or sociology, philosophy, spirituality, something like this?
There have been theories, but generally no. One example of that theory is that on the full moon, the gravity of the moon, just like it affects the tides, affects the blood in humans, and they become more aggressive, but that's just a myth. If there is a link between between physics and psychology and sociology, I don't know about any of them.
Well, there are many attempts at modeling the human behavior of game theory, which is a mathematical branch of mathematics, of sociology, of psychology, studies exactly that and tries to find models to understand why people make some choices in simple events. But for example, economy does something like that. Research in pure economy also deals with psychological, mathematical concepts, try to explain mathematically why people behave in some ways. So they're sure are, and there are also attempts at using the mathematical or physical models to understand, for example, in transport, there are many similarities between the way fluids move, liquids move, and people move in big cities, for example, and how people move in big cities. Or there are many studies about something which is called a multiplex, which is to study how, let's say, liquid move if they have several ways of moving. One, some faster, some larger, some different from the others, many channels. If they can move on many channels, which channel would they choose? And you can say, who cares? But when you think about how we move in cities, it is exactly like this. We can choose tubes, you can choose taxi, we can choose tram, car, everything. These are different levels of transport, and they can be studied for liquids, for humans. So, yes, definitely there are.
Well, I think on that note, it's time to move on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Where's the table? It's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Hi, everybody. My name's David. I'm the last speaker of tonight, but I'm here to tell you about the Tono Tono Man. So the Tono Tono Man is a seemingly normal, middle-aged man, and he seems like any typical 30-something-year-old until you talk to him, and he responds with Tono 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 Tono. It sounds silly, but one, the Tono Tono Man is real and he's on YouTube, and you should definitely go home and look him up because it's wild. But two, he's actually a really interesting case study in how language is represented in the brain. But case studies like him don't come along very often. And because language is actually very complicated to produce, from the tiny movements of our tongue to the very effective ways we express emotion, the question becomes, how do we separate language from the actual act of speaking? Well, when we think of languages, we usually think of spoken languages like French, English, or Chinese. But studies on sign language actually give us really fascinating evidence on how language is represented in the brain because it's a non-spoken language. And in this way, it avoids all the complex features of typical spoken languages. On the other hand, Tono Tono guy has all these complex features. He has specific mouth movements, and he expresses vocal emotion, but he doesn't have access to his language center. Tono Tono guy, as it turns out, has damage to what's called Broca's area of the brain. It's a part of the brain that's well studied and is known to be involved in producing speech. And when people have damage to this area of the brain, they seem like they know what they want to say, but they just can't get it out. It's actually really bad for FameLab speakers. But as it turns out, the really interesting thing about Broca's area is that a recent study found that just as it is activated when we speak, this area activates when sign language speakers make signs. That is to say, as far as your brain is concerned, sign language is the same as any other language. It just requires a different set of muscles to express itself. Because of this, therapists that specialize in autism have actually started to teach autistic children sign language as part of language therapy. And they find that children who learn sign language and English learn English faster than those who only learn English. With all this in mind, I have to wonder, Why do we call it sign language? It helps us communicate the same as any other language. And the brain treats it the same as any other language. Maybe it's time to shift our mindset on sign language by simply calling it. Thank you.
Any questions about anything brain-related or sign language? Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah. What is language? So when you when you have, let's say, your dog who understands words like walk or food or good boy or something like that, when is this barrier crossed between knowing a few words and having a language?
That is a very difficult question. Not being a linguist myself, I'm not like the go-to person, but I know it's debated on what is language and what is just representation of ideas. Some people argue that things like apes learning some signs and being able to communicate that way is proof that they have language, the same as people. But other linguists argue that they can represent some ideas with their hands. They can say food, they can say water, but that's not the same as having a system of language as people are known to do. And so some people argue that the syntax, the system of grammar that is common to people is not found in any other species. So in the end, when you say, what is language, I want to say, I don't know. But neither does anyone else.
Anyone else have any questions?
Well, I read an interesting article about that, about dogs, and how they can, going back to dogs, not only they can maybe understand a few commands, but of course they use other methods to provide some sort of information. So they've got an amazing sense of smell, and from, they go around smelling. Their mindscape is not driven by, maybe hearing things or seeing things, but this smell thing, and they can deduce from smells, who was there, what was their social positioning. So maybe that's a form of communication that could also be termed a language. So they urinate sort of words or messages.
I mean, maybe. I know there have been studies on like pheromones and humans, and like some studies show that like humans like can smell pheromones from farther than we expect, and you're actually more attracted to a woman while she's ovulating and stuff like that, despite the fact that there's no way you could know that at all. So some of that might carry over not only in dogs, but also to humans in ways that we might not expect.
So based on this, I'm wondering, where do you draw the line between communication and language? Because I think most people think they're the same thing, but obviously there's a debate on that. Because I know, for example, plants can actually communicate. They use molecules to do so. They can tell plants nearby, hey, I'm being eaten by aphids, you guys better watch out. And then the other plants pick up these molecules and start to produce defensive mechanisms. But I guess you wouldn't call that a language, or would you? Where do you draw the line?
I don't know. Like, in the end, you have to think, when we're talking to each other, when we're communicating with languages, really, we're just giving signals. I'm just making noises with my mouth at you right now. And because it's very complex and sophisticated, we call that language. So when beavers slap their tail against the water to warn against predators coming, is that language? When prairie dogs signal to each other that there is a very specific predator coming, is that a language? And so I think there may not be a single line between, is this just me signaling to another organism, or is this me signaling in some higher level? Is it just a product of what we are? Is there no real distinct thing called language?
Yeah, to connect with Por's question, and I think that one of the elements that can help us draw a line is, in general, describing things that are not necessary. I mean, the example he gave is something necessary for the survival of the species. Something I'm thinking of which is unnecessary for the species is color. Colors are usually, it is quite interesting to know, and this is why I'm asking, how colors get into a language. Because I know that, for example, in Greek language, in ancient Greek language, they had very few words for colors because they were not so used as we are to see extremely different and brilliant colors, for example, the one we are seeing in the background. How does sign language deal with colors? This is my question.
Sign language has words for colors: blue, yellow, brown.
Okay, what about dark brown, light brown?
Dark brown, light brown. I think there are modifiers for it. Usually, as far as American Sign Language goes, which is the only one I know a lot about, I think a lot of people would end up, if you're talking about a specific color, mauve, for existence, which I don't even know what color that is, but it is a color. Most people end up spelling out very specific things like that. So if you're a tailor or something and you end up working with shades that are like that, you will have ways of expressing that, whether you spell it out with your fingers or whether you create a sign to, communicate to your coworkers what color you're talking about. At the same time, I think it's interesting you bring up this thing about necessity as whether or not that involves language, because there are certain systems of communication throughout animals that express specifically that color. Joanna in the background was just telling me this afternoon how prairie dogs somehow communicate to one another, here comes that human or that predator. But if they send in humans wearing different colored shirts, they express that too. They have distinct ways of signaling that to each other. And even though that may or may not be necessary, it's a lot more complex than we would give them credit for. You don't think of prairie dogs as saying, here comes that human in the yellow sweater, but they might be able to do just that. So once again, the line is very, very blurred between what is language, whether animals have language, and where our language comes from.
Any questions?
Maybe I want to ask you a question, but perhaps then language can even affect our own abilities to differentiate between other signals coming through.
Oh, yes.
So, for example, linked to the color thing, I know I read a report that, for example, in Japanese, the language, there's many more words for different shades of blue, and they found then that the Japanese can actually distinguish different shades of blue a lot better than other people who don't have so many words.
It's true. The way people think of our perceptions forming our language, we have a word for this because we have 20 words for snow because we're surrounded by snow. But in reality, like you just said, the inverse relationship is true. The way we use language actually affects the way we perceive the world. If we have 20 different words for green, we'll see 20 different shades of green, et cetera, et cetera. We'll actually be able to perceive differences that we otherwise wouldn't even be able to see.
Yes, one more question there.
Again, on the necessity of language being necessary or not. Is there any literature in the sign language? I mean, videos that just tell stories, something that will also be useful, I think, to create a universal, a world sign language. Are there some stories just told for the sake of being told in sign languages or something like that, as far as you know?
Yeah, totally. I don't like studying, so really I learned most of my sign language watching stand-up deaf comedians on YouTube. And they're funny. You should watch them too. Yeah, people go on YouTube now. They have their deaf vlogs, and they just talk about their day in very, very fast sign language. It's hard to follow, but yeah.
Well, if nobody else has any questions.
A big round of applause to David. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, and that brings us to the end, unfortunately.
Yes, this is the end. Well, that was a thoroughly enjoyable
scientific
occasion for me.
extravaganza.
Yes, I hope you enjoyed it at least half as much, or an eighth of as much, like gravity and dark matter, as I did. Once again, many thanks to these organisations who helped fund it.
And especially to Dasha from the British
British
Council.
This is the lady who's responsible for FameLab
in the Czech Republic.
In the Czech Republic.
Without her, we wouldn't be standing here today.
Yes, a fantastic lady who's done so much to deserve your warm applause. Thank you for coming. And
if you want to find out more things FameLab, just go online and type in famelabcz.com. That's the official pages for the FameLab Czech Republic site. And also you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and lots of good stuff there. So
good night.
Thank you for being a great audience. Bye.